Hey everybody, this is Chris.
And this is Julia, and this is episode number 45 of the Mixology Talk podcast.
So we have to apologize because it's been a couple episodes since we got to all the listener questions, and they're starting to stack up.
But there are some great questions in here, and I think we're going to do our best to catch up today. If we don't get all of them, don't worry. We will definitely get to the remainder of the questions soon.
Yeah, so
keep them coming.
Yeah, please do. And just leave your comments over at mixologytalk.com. So the very first question is, I assume it's probably from the country of Bahrain.
Probably from a person from Bahrain.
Probably.
But it just says Bahrain.
Country. That would be silly.
That would be ridiculous.
But the question is, what is the difference between champagne and wine?
Now, this is a great question. I think that sometimes there's a lot of confusion with the word champagne. I know it wasn't until embarrassingly recently that I realized not all sparkling wine is actually champagne. Sparkling white wine is sparkling white wine, and some of it is champagne. But in order for it to be called champagne, it actually has to come from grapes that were grown in the Champagne region of France.
Exactly, and we can see a lot of this geographical naming even in the spirit world. Like bourbon is essentially whiskey, but in order to be called bourbon originally, I think it had to be from Bourbon County.
Interesting.
The laws have relaxed a lot since then. Now you can make bourbon anywhere in the country, but it has to be from the United States.
Well, and I think the origin of these rules was to maintain a certain level of quality. So, for example, the Champagne region of France, yes, it's a political boundary now, and I don't know how exact it is. But what I do know is this region has a certain quality to the soil that lends itself to really tasty wine. And I believe in the wine world, I think it's called terroir.
Not terrier. Because that's the way I said it for the first couple times I said it, and
how'd that go?
Not so well. No,
not so well.
Not so well. No, don't recommend saying that.
Also, don't call your dog terroir. That would be ridiculous.
Hilarious.
So the difference between champagne and wine is champagne is a wine, but not all wine is champagne. Champagne is a sparkling white wine that has been grown in the Champagne region of France and made in a very specific way.
Exactly. And the actual method is called method champenois.
Is it really?
It is, actually.
That sounds fancy.
So there's a whole method that goes into producing champagne that is very, very different from wine.
And part of that production actually creates the bubbles, right? It's not carbonated like Coca-Cola is.
Absolutely not. No, there's a whole process about that. There's actually live yeast in the bottle. There's a whole process about getting the yeast out, adding more sugar to it, and levels of sweetness to it. I mean,
here comes the science.
I'm telling you, you could geek out on wine or champagne probably for years and still not know all there is to know about champagne.
It's pretty amazing, though. I think just thinking about the fact that they actually create the carbonation by very carefully producing this wine in a very controlled environment. It really is pretty amazing, and I can respect why they want to sort of maintain that special nomenclature of calling it champagne.
Yeah, and everything about champagne is really amazing since the marketing that's involved around it, about
the marketing is a
celebration.
It's a big piece of it. Let's be honest.
The design of the bottle itself is actually manufactured to withstand much higher pressure than a normal bottle of wine. So
is it really?
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
There's just so much more pressure versus a non-sparkling wine.
Right.
They had to specially design it.
Well, and the corks too are a totally different shape for the same reason, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a whole process about it. It's amazing, and the history behind the Champagne region of France.
No, I'm going to go ahead and stop you. I'm going to go ahead and stop you right there. I don't think Mr. Bahrain needs to know all of the history.
Probably not, but there's a reason why the Champagne region is so esteemed and so highly regarded in the wine world.
So that's why you pay more for it. Basically, Champagne is a special region of France and a special way of making your wine, and that's why it's more expensive.
Exactly.
So there you go. That's probably more than you ever wanted to know, Mr. Bahrain. Sorry about that. Not really that sorry.
So the next question is from Steve from California. What type of gin and vermouth do you prefer in your Negroni? And the follow-up question is, ever make a Negroni with tequila?
Now that sounds fantastic.
That sounds really good.
So Chris, what type of gin and vermouth do you prefer in your Negroni?
Back when I started attending bar, there was only a handful of gins out on the market. And I gravitated towards one because it had a lot of intensity of flavor. It was just a classic London dry style gin, and that is Tanqueray. I've always loved Tanqueray.
It's a classic.
So
Can't really go wrong with Tanqueray.
It's just really, it just tastes like gin.
But I will say one thing, and that is if you are a newcomer to gin and you haven't quite gotten used to that good old Christmas tree juniper taste, you may not want to start there. Start with something gentler, the what's it called, New American style?
Yeah.
What's a good brand that you'd recommend for somebody who's new to gin?
Aviation would be good. Hendrix is good. Hendrix is more mellow.
Nice.
There's a whole new style of gin. Gin has exploded over the last 5 years and is becoming a very, very dominant category in the spirits world right now.
I think a big part of that is this new category, though. There's this new type of gin called, I've heard it called a couple different things.
New Western American or something like that.
I've also heard international style. I'm not sure exactly which one's quote-unquote correct. Let us know in the comments if you do know. But the basic idea is that you're not going to see as strong of a juniper profile in this gin, which is a good thing for newcomers to gin, because typically when folks take their first sip, they spit it out and say, oh my God, I'm chewing on Christmas trees.
Right.
Myself included.
The supporting botanicals in the new style of gin really starts to shine through. So you get a lot more dominant on the spices and
citrus.
The citrus.
Yeah.
Notably. And a lot more of a kind of a supporting role for the juniper. So it's much more mellow. And I always say gin is what happens to vodka when it grows up. Sorry, vodka. I drink vodka too, but
I can see that.
It just has more substance to it. It has more flavor, has more intensity of flavor. So I always kind of gravitate towards gin over vodka just over the last 5 years or so.
So you're going to stick with Tanqueray for your Negroni, but for newcomers, go ahead and try one of those recommendations Chris said just a minute ago. What about vermouth?
I think there is only one vermouth to choose for Negronis, and I hate to say it, but it's Cinzano.
Why is that?
It's not the most expensive. It's not the most acclaimed at this moment. There's a couple that are a lot more expensive, but Cinzano just has this really amazing herbal quality to it that marries up perfectly in a Negroni. It can't be beat. In my
Interesting.
opinion.
Huh.
Yeah. So if you differ from my opinion, I'd love to hear about it, but you're probably wrong.
If you disagree, you don't have to comment. That would be fine if you didn't.
So yeah, let's just go ahead and edit all of that out. But if you have a vermouth that you prefer, we'd love to hear about that as well. But for me, Cinzano sweet vermouth is the perfect vermouth for a Negroni. Now, there are a couple options as far as what to put in as the bittering component. Campari is absolutely the classic one.
That's a traditional, when you look up a recipe for a Negroni, it typically says Campari, right?
Right, exactly. So it's equal parts gin, sweet vermouth, Campari. There's been a couple of people that have used Gran Classico as a substitute. I've even heard a rumor that Gran Classico was the original formula for Campari. Not exactly sure how valid that is, but you know how rumors are. But yeah, it makes a very good Negroni as well.
So what about tequila? Have you ever had a Negroni with tequila?
So good. The beautiful thing about the Negroni is you have 3 different components, and if you can substitute out the identity of those 3 components, you have another amazing cocktail. You can't really screw it up.
So have you ever had a Negroni with tequila?
It's good. It's so good.
Nice. So
I highly recommend it.
Did you keep the other ingredients the same?
Yeah, just
Blanco tequila.
Yep, just took out the gin, put in Blanco tequila. It's a fantastic cocktail.
Good to know. So if you're out of gin, anyone, or if you desperately hate juniper or you're allergic or something, go ahead and try it with the tequila.
Yep.
Might work for you.
Absolutely. So the next question is from Jason from Knoxville.
And he asks, as a bartender, how do you feel about couples who come up to the bar to eat instead of waiting for a table? And if they don't order drinks but just food, isn't the tip from food greater than from 1 or 2 drinks?
Yeah, and I think there's a couple ways you can look at this. First of all, I love couples sitting at the bar ordering food, preferably cocktails, bottle of wine, whatever. But from here, you have that trade-off of time versus money. You know, if they're sitting down for food, you probably had a 45-minute dedication to this people at your bar that are going to take up those bar stools. The idea is you can probably swap out, that one couple for a bunch of other people just ordering cocktails and turn them over much faster. But you have the opportunity to really engage with them, to have a conversation with them, and to open them up to, new ideas and possibly get them appetizers, entree, dessert, the whole 9 yards.
Maybe turn them into regulars.
Right, exactly. So you can develop a relationship much more you have more time with them
right,
than you would with somebody just ordering a cocktail.
Well, not only that, but I think there's another factor at play as well, and that is if you've got an empty bar and nobody's there and a couple sits down, now you don't have an empty bar anymore. And it may actually encourage more other people to walk in the door or walk up to the bar. So while you may have lost those 2 bar seats, if you've got them to spare, it may not be a bad thing overall for your revenue for the night.
So the idea here is that you're kind of sacrificing that turnover for quality. You're able to spend the time with these people. For me, I always love people eating at my bar. I got a chance to do all the things that we talked about, develop my regulars, have a conversation with them, and just spend time with these people. So I'm a big fan.
But it definitely does depend on the kind of place you're in. And I could definitely see there being times when this might be frustrating if you're in a bar that's, 7 people deep with folks just looking for a drink to pick up and take away. That could be kind of costly. So it kind of depends on the environment.
Absolutely.
But I could really see the value in creating a relationship with those people, maybe creating some regulars, getting them to try something new they haven't tried before. I think there's value there.
Yeah, so for me, at the end of the day, big fan.
So the last question for today comes from Tom from London, England. Now I'm gonna go ahead and not make any jokes about Old Tom Gin, but I am gonna say that.
That's all you need to say.
That's all I gotta say.
And he actually coins a phrase for us, which I thought was really funny. So he starts his question off by saying, "Hello, CJ."
I don't think we've ever been called CJ before.
That's awesome. Thanks, Tom.
Just curious, Tom, why not JC?
Don't answer that question,
just
Tom.
Wondering.
Step away from the question.
Just curious if there was a reason.
So in episode 28, you said your biggest pet peeve was a bartender who doesn't know when to stir and when to shake. Fruit juice should always be shaken, you said, but every recipe I've seen for a screwdriver calls for vodka and ice to be stirred, then OJ to be poured on top of everything in the glass. So not shaken, basically. So I'm a little bit confused.
And I think this is a really good point, Tom. Something we don't really talk about, but there's kind of a third kind of cocktail. There's shaken cocktails, there's stirred cocktails, and there's something that Chris taught me about called a built cocktail.
Yeah, so the idea here is that, there's certain cocktails that they don't really benefit from being shaken. For example, a vodka cranberry.
Right.
You don't want to shake it. It's just...
You don't need to.
Right.
I mean, you could. Would it hurt it?
Vodka tonics, so maybe we can categorize that into a 2-part cocktail, but there's also built cocktails in the actual cocktail world.
Which, what a built cocktail means and why it's called that is that you build it in the glass. You build it in the glass you're going to be...
With ice.
You're going to be serving it in. So a screwdriver is a perfect example of this.
Exactly. So, it would look weird to shake a screwdriver. Now that you say that does kind of sound a little bit crazy.
It's true. I mean, I think it's a really good point, though. In episode 28, we did say if there's fruit juice, you should shake it. And this is a perfect caveat.
Yeah, and... to not be too defensive, but the idea here was I was thinking more along the lines of sours,
right,
or anything that have multiple ingredients where one could. You really want to integrate the ingredients well together and create that dilution and kind of bring everything together as well.
And let's be honest, this stuff is a little bit more of an art than a science. Not all of the rules are perfect every time. So we're kind of cheating here. But I will say, for a screwdriver, you're absolutely right. You add the vodka and ice to a glass and top it with OJ. That is the way to do it. I don't recommend shaking. I certainly don't recommend shaking it in the glass.
No, probably not.
That would make a huge mess.
No,
definitely
not. So much. But thank you very much for the question. And that helps to kind of clarify, that perspective.
This stuff can be confusing, and what you don't see is that when we're not recording this podcast, I'm asking Chris these kinds of questions all the time. So now we get to hold him accountable.
Yeah,
so true.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
So that pretty much does it for this episode. And once again, please feel free to leave your questions over at mixologytalk.com, and we will definitely get back to them.
By the way, I've got a special announcement for you. I didn't tell anyone this, I don't think, but over the last couple weeks, I have been putting together a cocktail course.
I know, and it's really good. I'm watching it right now. Yeah,
that says a lot coming from a real bartender.
A real bartender.
So I went ahead and put together a cocktail course that is for absolute beginners, for folks who really want to learn the basics of putting together a cocktail at home that's going to taste good and not be crazy expensive. So if you have any interest in taking this course, go head over to mixologytalk.com/course cocktail course. That's one word, cocktail course, and we will redirect you over to the course with a special coupon code that's just for Mixology Talk listeners. So go ahead and leave your comments and questions over at mixologytalk.com/45, and we will catch you next week.
So once again, thank you very much, everyone, and until next week, have a good night and cheers.
Cheers! Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.